The poll results are in and most races are final. So I've got Core Strategies political experts, Chris and Michael, here to talk about what just happened. It looks like at least one race that we won't know the official results for a while, another race that may trickle into the next couple days. So not everything's official just yet, but I want to get some hot takes here. So Michael, I already just did a video with you on Boss Bailey. So Chris, why don't we start with you? Overall, what are your thoughts from Election Day and these election results?
Well, there's a couple thoughts I have. The first one is that this seems to be the year of the incumbent. Voters turning out in this primary weren't very progressive. They weren't very anti-establishment. There wasn't really a race at the top of the ticket for president in either party, particularly the Democratic Party. But either way, this was a year of the incumbent. Conservative Southern Illinois state representatives did very well, and liberal state representatives in Cook County and the suburbs for the Democratic Party also did very well. There wasn't really a lot of well-funded opposition on any side of the equation, so that obviously helped. But even well-funded opposition downstate absolutely got smoked. I mean, we're looking at Matt Hall struggling to break 10% versus Will Howe. So certainly the year of the incumbent, and it's also the year where it seems that money does move votes in politics. I mean, if you had the money advantage in a lot of these primaries, you're probably won.
Yeah, well, and certainly we got to talk about turnout. But before we do that, Michael, what are your overall thoughts on what just happened?
Yeah, I would agree with what Chris had to say. It seems like, people are happy with, Republican primary voters are happy with who they're currently being represented by, and they weren't looking to really shake things up this cycle, which is kind of a change from the governor's election last cycle, where they were kind of looking for more of those dynamic, let's stir it up kind of folks. But obviously turnout played a major factor in that as well. There wasn't, a presidential race really driving turnout. It was all the local stuff. So people could kind of keep the races more localized, which I think is, produces a better result.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that turnout. So turnout was abysmal. There's no other way to put it. And frankly, just interest in this election was abysmal. You had nobody engaging. You had the fewest candidates we've seen in a very, very long time for a presidential election year. It just seems like nobody, I'll just say it, nobody gives a shit about this election, which can't be a good thing. I mean, to me, that's the takeaway right now from this election. And it's a disheartening one that more people didn't care to run. More people didn't care to vote. There's a lot of big issues, a lot of big things going on in our state and country. And it doesn't seem like that's enough to get people to care. What do you guys think about that?
I mean, I kind of wish we could have seen some more polling for some of these other races. Obviously, we can kind of use the Boss race kind of anecdotally in Southern Illinois, but we didn't see we did at Core Strategies, we did a poll at the beginning of the cycle, and then there was another poll that was done about a week and a half ago, and the margins were the same, right? There wasn't really significant movement when you polled the electorate over the course of all that time, regardless of, how many Facebook posts and mailers and TV ads, et cetera. It just stayed at that, Mike Boss is out by 6 points. And I think we saw that in a lot of other races as well. If they had been polled, it probably would have been, kind of a similar trajectory, that a lot of people went into this primary with their mind made up and they didn't really change it.
Yeah. Chris, what do you think?
From my perspective, it doesn't seem like there was a big issue in a lot of these races that would have turned people out to vote or vote for a candidate other than the incumbent. There were some very local issues that were at play here, but most of the issues that opposition candidates were trying to present were manufactured. We talked about, the Hall-Wilhauer race. I mean, Hall really didn't have a major issue he could go after with Wilhauer, and it obviously showed. Even Bailey, he was trying to artificially create the amnesty stuff and some of the Boss other votes that weren't deemed conservative enough, but it wasn't really anything concrete. Usually, if you want to drive people to the polls or get people energized about an issue, it's got to be black or white. This is one side, and this is the side the other my opponent did, and this is why you need to vote for me. There really wasn't that much going on this election. Democrats had to navigate around the Gaza issue a little bit, but there wasn't enough well-funded opposition at the congressional level to actually make any sort of impact. So there was a money advantage with incumbency, and there wasn't a real issue to go against them when it came to actual messaging.
Well, do you guys see this carrying to November? I mean, looking at the November election, you've got a top of the ticket for president where voters are not overly excited about either of these two candidates, especially not independent, moderate, swing voters. Neither of the presidential candidates excite them. So if we see this low of interest in the Democratic and Republican primaries, I would imagine that means the general election, could be extremely low voter participation as well. What do you think?
I think we're seeing a lot of voter apathy right now, and I think that will carry over to the general election. I think it'll go down a little bit because people still feel like the need to be involved in presidential politics, no matter how terrible either of the nominees are. In this case, both of them, perhaps. So I think a little bit of the apathy will go away once we get to a more black and white Republican versus Democrat dynamic. But still, I think voters right now are frustrated. The country seems to be going in the wrong direction. I mean, every poll will tell you that most people indicate they think this country's not doing well right now, or the state's not doing well right now. Though the state polling is moving in the opposite direction, of course. But either way, I mean, I think some of it will go away, but voters are apathetic right now, and there really needs to be some strong messaging by both parties to make people actually care and feel like their vote matters and that they can make a difference.
Yeah, Michael, what do you think? What do you think November is going to look like?
I think it'll be improved turnout from, what we saw in this primary, just because we had a lot of very weak challengers. And I think a lot of people saw it as, hey, a lot of these races were over before they even started. And also how nasty it got. I think that turned a lot of people off. Some of these races ended up being very divisive and negative. So I think people will show up for the presidential more so than they did for this one, for sure.
I mean, they have to, considering
They have
that
to.
was so low
Well,
here.
yeah,
But
10%
I mean, you
or
typically
whatever.
see 70+% turnout in a presidential election, and I don't know that we're going
I
to.
don't think it'll be that in margins. No, it won't be 70% probably.
Yeah. Which, I mean, it's going to be a factor. I don't know who benefits from that factor. We're going to have to do a lot of analysis on our SFRs in the coming weeks and months to figure that out. But it's certainly going to be a big factor come November when you look at, turnout's not going to look like it typically looks every 4 years, and everyone's going to have to take that into account.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a couple outstanding races, one in each of your regions. So let's talk about them. Michael, I'll stick with you. We've talked about the results in all these races, but there's one race we have no information on. That's 102. That's Niemerg against Ackland, the write-in race. Typically, you'll see some results from that as the counties start to release those numbers in the 1 or 2 days after Election Day. But we've had some people that have reported that maybe some of these counties are going to wait the full 2 weeks until they release their full results, which means we won't know the results for HD 102's primary for maybe 2 weeks. You hearing anything about that?
The word kind of on the ground is it seems like there's basically like two options here. Either one, like Adam Niemerg will have enough write-in votes and be the state rep candidate, or neither of the candidates will have enough write-in votes, and this will go into the summer whenever the parties can slate somebody. Like, it just doesn't seem like Ackland got the traction that people were expecting. They were kind of late to the game. They kind of were off to a slow start. And, we talked, I think last week, about some of the messaging that they were using, and it just didn't seem to be working. Like, they were both driving each other's name ID up in a write-in campaign whenever they should have been focused on, getting people to write them in.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, the strategy there was not great at all. I mean, I don't anticipate Ackland's going to pull it off, which I've been saying for a while. Just like, by the way, everyone who kept telling us Hall's going to win, Hall's going to win, Hall's going to win. And then, of course, Wilhauer won 80-20. I mean, they're logically, we talked about this 6-9 months ago. I mean, how many SFR episodes have we done since then? But we've been consistent about it, that if you don't have, as Chris said at the beginning, if you don't have an issue to run on, if you can't run to the right in a primary or to the left in the primary on the Democratic side against an incumbent, you're not going to win. And there's no space to Niemerg's right. There's no space to Wilhauer's right. There's no space even on Bryant's right or Severin's right. I mean, there's a reason why these incumbents are all winning. I don't know that changes with Niemerg Ackland.
right.
Chris, for you, the race that's going to drag on for at least a couple of days is Cook County State's Attorney. This thing's down as of the time that we're recording this, which is Tuesday night. This thing's down to about a 2% race. This thing's going to be neck and neck, isn't it?
Yeah, the morning viewer of this will have a better idea of where this race is at than I do. But as in my last mathematical calculation, Burke's sitting at 51.12% of the vote, which the fact that she is even in this position is impressive, because Vallis wasn't in this position this long on his election night. Now, Burke has an added advantage in that she's dealing with suburban votes. But
right. I was just going to say, Vallis wasn't in this position, but Vallis only got to run in the city of Chicago. So I don't know if that's apples to apples.
True, but it's a similar dynamic in terms of their opponents and their candidacies. Burke, these returns tell me that Burke's campaign actually worked, that their abortion first messaging and all the money they spent actually moved the needle with voters. The fact that they're within a couple points in the city of Chicago at all tells me that they have improved significantly with African American voters compared to Val's.
So, Chris, it seems like from the last couple of times we've talked about this race, it seems like they made a trade-off. Let's do better in the city, but maybe not as well in the suburbs. And I think you're seeing that in the results where their suburban numbers are not as strong as they should be and could be, but their Chicago numbers are much better than I think anticipated. And so maybe it's going to work. We're going to know in the coming days. Maybe it will work. I still think there were more votes to be had in the suburbs, and so I still think it was the wrong strategy. However, I think we do need to give credit that they clearly had a path that they wanted to track, that they wanted to follow. They had a strategy. They ran it, and to some degree it's worked. Does it work enough to get a win? We're going to find out, but credit where credit is due, right?
Right, and I would agree with that sentiment. Based on what the numbers I'm looking at right now, the likelihood is that Burke is probably going to get below 51% by the end of tonight, going to mail-in ballots as the underdog versus Harris, who's going to be favored with mail-in ballots. That being said, Burke had a lane, she ran with it. She probably had an added advantage in the city of Chicago that Brandon Johnson is so terrible. Now, with that being said, she probably would have done better in the city if she actually tried tying Harris to Brandon Johnson.
Right.
Their campaign never
Well, the Bring Chicago Home referendum proves that, right?
Exactly, but their campaign never actually did that, and their campaign didn't devote significant resources into the suburbs. And once we have precinct results for the suburbs in about 2 weeks, when Cook County finally gives it to us, you're probably going to see that Burke is probably underperforming where she needs to be in my neck of the woods, and probably even in your neck of the woods, Collin. We'll know Chicago tonight, so we'll have a better understanding. But Burke probably would have, if Burke would have ran an actual field program, I would be saying Burke's at 53% and that she's pretty much a shoo-in to beat the mail-in ballots. But right now she's sitting at 51.12, and I don't think the optimist that's deep within my soul, the small optimist, tells me I think Burke does have a chance because she's over 51. But the practical person in me says I don't think so. Nothing ever goes right for Chris.
I mean, you did eat that optimist a very long time ago, so they don't exist anymore. I mean, listen, I think vote by mail ballots, you've got to assume a 2% swing for Harris probably is my guess. So if Burke's right now is up barely over 2%, this thing could come down to the slimmest, absolute slimmest. Well, at this point, I'd say it is coming down to the absolute slimmest of margins. So this thing could drag on for another week plus as they look at more of these write-in votes. Keep in mind, the city of Chicago did announce that they're not counting the write-in votes. I keep saying write-in, the vote by mail ballot votes that came in today on election day. So there's going to be a big drop tomorrow on these vote by mail ballots because they did not count the ones that arrived today, let alone the ones that are going to arrive in the coming days. So there's a lot of votes that are still to be counted. And the assumption is, based on who was backing which candidates, that Harris is going to do very well with those vote by mail ballots.
And I would agree. But there are a couple lanes where Burke could have just ended this race already. We're looking at drastically low Latino turnout. Same problem that Vallis had in the mayoral election. And Burke probably is doing very well with Latinos right now, but they frankly did not even show up to vote. It doesn't even look like Chuy Garcia's primary challenge from Ray Lopez is even moving the needle in a lot of these city wards or even Latino suburbs.
Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court race certainly didn't do it.
And you're also looking the same thing with Iris Martinez. Iris Martinez is being smoked for clerk of the circuit court, and she's basically getting the same margin she did 4 years ago, which is about 33% that she won with. But Latinos just didn't show up this year, and it's to Burke's disadvantage. Now, she didn't have any Latino outreach to begin with, same Vallis, but Vallis had in his race. But I'm thankful that it's at least this close that we're even able to talk about it, because I was coming into election night expecting Harris to be up like 4, and this race would be already over, and I would be yelling at the camera right now. Right now, there's still some, there's still some delusional optimism coming out of Chris Jackowiak, so I'm not yelling at the camera, and I'm just hoping to God this goes properly.
Yeah, well, listen, I mean, for as a Cook County resident like you, I certainly want it to be Burke. That's the fingers crossed scenario here. But as a Republican who likes to win elections in Cook County, I wouldn't mind Clayton Harris. So we'll see. I will give him credit though. I mean, there were more votes in Chicago than there were in Cook County for this race. So running a Chicago focused race certainly wasn't a bad path to take. We'll find out if it was enough to get a win. All right, let's close with this. Who were the biggest losers? I got to imagine Brandon Johnson. I mean, progressive Twitter is absolutely ripping into Brandon Johnson. So I think we got to start there. I mean, with the Bring Chicago Home referendum failing pretty significantly when the progressive tax did so well in the city of Chicago, this is absolutely a referendum on Johnson. And his poll numbers are an absolute tank for anything that's tied to it. What do you think, Chris?
You know, with Bring Chicago Home, the progressives had the momentum going into election day because they got kicked off the ballot, but they were reinstated, and it didn't seem like the opposition really wanted to fight them on that issue, so they just kind of let it stay on the ballot. And I expected Bring Chicago Home to come through because of that, because it didn't really seem like there was a concerted effort against it. There were ads and everything, but they weren't as significant as the Bring Chicago Home ads were. I was getting those ads every day. I don't even live in the city of Chicago. I'm getting those ads on YouTube every single day about Bring Chicago Home. But I think what sunk Bring Chicago Home is two things. Number one, Johnson is hated. Like he is more hated than Lori Lightfoot was at this point in her administration. Like nobody
more hated than she was at the end of her administration,
which is impressive. But nobody likes Brandon Johnson. So it's the same concept when you look back to the progressive tax. Do you want, with the progressive taxes, should the rich pay more in taxes? The average voter probably says yes. Do you want the state of Illinois to have more of your tax dollars? Also, no, I do not want that to happen. And it's the same concept in the city of Chicago. Should we raise taxes on people to fight homelessness? Maybe not the worst idea in the world. Do we want Brandon Johnson to have a blank check from the taxpayers of Chicago to do whatever he wants to end homelessness? No, nobody wants that in the city of Chicago right now. The other issue is the migrant crisis, because people in the back of their minds, they think of homeless. They're also thinking of migrants. And the migrant crisis, not a very popular issue in Chicago right now. Not a very popular thing to talk about. So in the back of their minds, people look at that long-winded spiel on the ballot, which most people didn't even think to read, and they're like, nah, this doesn't sound like a good idea. I don't want more migrants in my neighborhood. I don't want my tax dollar paying for migrants. That's another reason why this failed. It was a bad campaign on the progressive side. They didn't have good enough messaging for this, and Brandon Johnson just sucks, so of course it was going to fail.
Well, listen, we saw that with progressive tax. It was a bad campaign by Pritzker and his team. One of the few times that we could say that. You see it here. I mean, the left is not showing us that they're incredible at winning elections. I think it just shows that we on the Republican side are really good at losing elections, because we're looking up at this opposition showing how much they fail. If you can't win on an issue like this that polls tremendously well in the city of Chicago, you can't win at all in these elections if we could put up decent challenges to them. I mean, this is heartening to me for general elections, because I've got to imagine that you take out all the other factors, and as you said, not the worst thing to run on politically, this issue, but I'll give the conservative sides of this, like the realtors, the chambers all got involved against this in Chicago, and they hit the nail on the head, which was, do you trust Brandon Johnson with this money? That was clearly the winning message. And I don't know, like you, I don't live in the city, so I didn't see all the back and forth, but I did see that they were pushing that narrative pretty hard, and clearly it worked.
Yeah, but just like you just said about the strengths of progressive campaigns, this goes, I must touch on the state's attorney's race very briefly here. This shows that, again, Burke could have had a much bigger margin if there was a actual better, real, solid campaign, but there wasn't, and that's why she's only squeaking ahead right now. So the lesson here is, same as the mayoral election, progressives aren't really that good at winning elections. It just so happens the moderates and the conservatives always find a way to shoot themselves in the foot every election.
Yeah, you're not wrong. Michael, I'll let you guys give me any other losers that you guys can think of, but I got to ask you, I mean, Bailey's obviously a big loser coming out of this. For those who haven't seen, he put out a statement and then gave a speech, I believe, where he basically put the blame on churches, said it's all about churches not coming out, and they're the reason, they're at fault. there's a trend here. When Bailey lost his first race, it was weak-kneed Republicans. Now, when he lost this race, it's all because of the churches. There's no Darren Bailey taking any sort of blame for his own losses. And at some point, do people start to say, like, dude, stop blaming us for your own faults and failures here? I mean, the Illinois Freedom Caucus had an okay night. They won some races, didn't win all of them, but they won all their incumbent races. But Bailey's their biggest loss. Do they even say, all right, dude, go away? We're actually doing better without you.
Maybe. I think that, they, over the course of the past 2 elections, they burn a lot of bridges. I mean, and I think that that was one of the reasons that resulted in their demise this cycle on this Bailey race, was that there are a lot of people that were motivated to work against him,
Yeah, I mean, you make enemies and it comes back to haunt you. I mean, why do you think I've never run for office? I'm not an idiot.
Right.
So what's the path here for Bailey? I mean, he's coming out of this. He does not look strong. He's going to blame it on Trump's endorsement. But he was behind the whole race. Even before Trump endorsed, he was still solidly behind. It's going to be really hard for him to pin this on Trump to say that's why he lost.
We can try to say that, but the data doesn't reflect that. Like we saw, in that polling, the Trump endorsement didn't really move the needle that much, maybe a point or two, but there wasn't significant movement, from the time that endorsement happened until election day. Like the polling was consistent across the, throughout the entire cycle. So I think he can try to make that case, and I'm sure there'll be people that believe it, but it's not based in reality, and the data doesn't back that up.
Yeah. Well, those are my 2 biggest losers from the night. You guys got anybody else you want to add to that list?
I have a broad category here, and it's specific to Cook County. Moderate Latinos. We saw not Burke. We saw, I'm calling him Burke, little Burke. We saw Raymond Lopez challenge Chuy Garcia and get absolutely smoked. And Lopez also put up a number of different challengers to state representatives, both in and around that congressional district, who all got destroyed as well. Like nobody's even close. You also look at people like George Cardenas, who lost his race for ward committeeman to Teresa Ma in the 12th ward. Natalie Toro lost, not as much as people were thinking she was going to lose. People were talking about her coming in third. She's coming in a respectable second, but she loses in the 20th Senate district. Iris Martinez gets smoked for Cook County, clerk of the circuit court. I mean, moderate Latinos just had a terrible, terrible night. They're either getting beaten by progressive Latinos or just being beaten by the establishment in general. And it has been a downward trend for I shouldn't call them establishment. They're not establishment anymore, but more moderate conservative Latinos in Cook County, where they've just been losing races ever since the HDO fell apart back in the 2000s. So,
Chris, you know what I'm going to say about this, right?
There's an opening.
Come on, you moderate Latinos who have no place right now in today's Democratic Party in Illinois. Come on home.
Yeah, but Collin, you and I both know every time the Republican Party starts talking about how, the black demographics coming home to the Republican Party this year, or the Latinos are coming home to the Republican Party this year, it never actually happened.
Listen, all I'm going to say is we are in the midst of a big data deep dive that will be released as part of our Empower platform. So another reason why you should be a subscriber to Empower to Win. And I'm looking at the numbers from Hispanics and these respondents. And yet again, I'm seeing lots of movement and openness to moderates, conservatives, Republicans, independents, pulling away from liberals and Democrats within the Latino subset, the Hispanic subset. There is, and you're seeing it in election results too. I don't know if there's a space in today's Democratic Party, unless you're a far left Latino, which many of them are not. There just isn't a place in the Democratic Party for them. Our party, the Republican Party, has got to do a better job of making space for them under what should be a big tent. But they don't have a home right now, and we really should be doing everything we can to bring them to our side.
Yeah, but that requires resources, something the Illinois Republican Party doesn't have. But again, there's been a failure with messaging to moderate Latinos. There's an opening there for Republicans to continue moving the needle in their direction. But moderate Latinos lost tonight. Part of it, they have nothing to blame by themselves. There weren't a lot of strong campaigns going on in that neck of the woods, but still, they were losers tonight, and it just makes the Democratic Party go further and further to the left.
Yeah, true. Michael, you got any other losers from tonight? You want to talk about Madison County? Get some big wins from there, buddy.
Yeah, big win in Madison County with Chris Slusser and Patrick McRae. Winning by 30, 40 points. I don't know what the
knocking off an
ultimate-
incumbent board
but the-
chairman who had been in office for
yeah.
a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a big victory for Madison County Republicans, a big victory for taxpayers because Kurt Prenzler's, track record in that office was not good. So
I know you're always our optimist. So asking you to talk about losers is probably not going to work out. So I'll keep prodding you and hoping. All right.
I think it was there was this kind of theme over the cycle. A lot of the campaigns ended up being very negative, very vindictive, and a lot of kind of like sketchy tactics. And a lot of the people that utilized those tactics weren't successful. So that was good to see. We saw some pretty nasty things from the Wesley Cash campaign. He got beat by 40 points. We saw like racist radio ads from the Angela Evans campaign. She got beat by 40 points. It just didn't work out for him.
Yeah. Some nasty things for sure. And, we're going to have, there's going to be a price to pay after today, I'm sure. But it's March, right? We got some time to come together before the real fight begins as we look towards November. All right. Any closing thoughts from you guys as we close this down on what was ultimately a fairly boring election night?
Burke better be very thankful she's still up right now as of this recording, or else this entire episode would have been me yelling at the camera.
Yeah, look, you'll have more chances. Don't worry.
Oh, don't worry.
Michael?
I think overall it was a good night for Republicans. There were a couple of races. Obviously, they were disappointing, but for the most part, the people that needed to win their primaries won their primaries, and now we can kind of move on to the general election where it really matters.
Yeah, we got a lot of work ahead of us for sure, especially with what's going to be a tough sled with a top of the ticket that's not going to help us in a lot of places. So we've got a lot of work to do here to pull this thing off in November. All right, gentlemen, appreciate your time. Thanks for keeping your liquid intake to a minimum prior to recording. So I didn't, but that's okay. I've only said a few things that I may pay for later. Thanks, guys. We'll talk more later.
Sounds good. See ya.